Welcome to The Topic on HCC TV. You're also watching us on Facebook Live and YouTube. Thanks for all of you who are joining us. We're usually here every Tuesday live at 1 p.m. And you can always catch the rebroadcast on HCC TV. You can watch us in social media. Look for us as Houston Community College District across all platforms. Today, we are talking about our history program across our disciplines. You know, Houston Community College recognizes the value of new ideas, but we also understand that innovation grows out of an understanding of the past. Today on The Topic, we're talking history, and we're beginning now with Dr. Samuel Hogsett. He's an instructor in the history department with an emphasis on African-American studies. Dr. Hogsett, welcome to this show. We had you on our other show, Up to the Minute, a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, Todd, I'm excited to be back and ready to do some talking about history.
Well, let's talk about why it's important to study history. We hear a lot of people, if you look on social media, everybody seems to be an expert on everything. But what everyone doesn't seem to be an expert on is history and knowing what happened in the past and why we don't need to repeat that. Maybe you can tell us about what is important about studying history.
Well, it's interesting you would say that everybody's an expert. I run into that a lot when I tell people what I do. Many times people will say, oh, yes, I'm a history buff too. And I immediately correct them and say, no, I'm not a buff, I'm an expert. And that goes over one way or another with people depending on their egos. But everybody's not a historian, as you know, but history is important because it helps to answer questions.
I didn't understand that.
And it helps to answer questions about people, places, events, and it adds a sense of understanding where you belong, where you're situated. For example, what I mean is this. So have you ever wondered why something was like it is? You say like, well, why is the government situated like this? Or why did the president say this? Or why do we have these rules? Or what even caused this? History answers those questions.
Right.
It provides answers that allow us to be able to deal with our situations, whatever they may be. So history locates us, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this, though. I mentioned that, you know, to stop us from repeating history, but that seems to happen over and over again. We know the history of something, you see it coming, you know what's going to happen, and it still happens.
Well, here's the thing. I'm glad you said that. For one thing, it needs to be clear, history does not repeat itself. If we did, we just wait for something to happen. But what history gives us is lessons.
Right.
It provides us with lessons, and it allows us to look at similar situations. Now, if we learn those lessons and we apply different techniques or systems and or solutions, then hopefully the outcome will be different, especially when you're talking about wars and conflicts and things like that. Certainly we don't want to have that. And there are certain lessons that we can draw from history. Now, here's the thing. Historians will tell you that history, like myself, doesn't start. We don't study history till 50 years divorced from it. So What's going on right now, we will not actually study it until 50 years have passed. So right now, historically, 1972. That's where we would look at that because we can now determine causes, effects, different interactions between people, systems, climate, things like that. All come together. We can study that now. If we study it right now, what's going on in 2022, that's called current events.
Right, right. We talked about that on the last show with why is 50 years the benchmark?
Good question. I have no idea, but no, I'm serious. I do know because it gives us adequate time to see how the change over time and what that means and how that affects whatever we're actually studying. So yes, it's very important and crucial to have that time separation to look at all of the factors of whatever event or people or persons, place or thing that we're looking at. So it's the change over time and the different influences that allow us after about 50 years to really get down and dig deep and find out what's going on.
You specialize in African-American studies. What's the difference between African-American history and African-American studies or Black studies?
Well, I remember when I was on the show last time, I kind of made a mistake at the beginning because I got thrown off. Usually when I first started, there is a difference. African-American history is the study of African-Americans and African-American experience, cultural experiences, political experience, and African-American life in the Americas. Whereas Black studies is an interdisciplinary approach to people of what we call of African descent over time. So we're looking at African culture and investigating the thought and patterns of African identified people, using their concepts, perspectives, and unique heritage. Let me give you an example. So let me ask you a question. So for you, is there a past, present, and future?
Absolutely. Do I know what the future is? I hope I know what it is, but we're all uncertain.
Okay. In traditional African culture, there is no future. There is only a past where the ancestors dwell and a present. And there is no future. That's a very African concept. Wow. Now, so that's a very different concept. It's more of a circular rather than a Eurocentric view would be more linear, past, present, and future. Now, who's right? Who's wrong? Those are concepts. So the understanding that is key to understanding the differences and influence of different people and how they view the world. So a different worldview. So I just dropped something on you,
you did, and you said who's right, who's wrong. And to me, there's no right or wrong. It's just two ways of looking at something.
That's exactly right. A worldview. And sometimes a worldview can have tragic consequences, as we see when you're talking about historically with European interactions with Native Americans, two different worldviews on land. One, land ownership. Whites' land was a commodity, or Europeans, I should say, was a commodity to be bought and sold. Native Americans, you can no more buy land than you can air or the great seas or waters. Two different concepts. What happens? They clash here in America, and we've seen the results. So those are two different worldviews. We study those things. History provides you with an outlook, and you can understand and get to an understanding that there are different worldviews, and there may not be a right or wrong. It depends on how your particular worldview is situated.
And that would be in essence, the benefit of studying history to understand those different worldviews.
Yes. Well, the study history, one of the best ways, one of the best things that I've noticed that you can get out of studying history, it translates nicely into other disciplines. For example, if I wasn't a historian, I would make a great police detective. And you might say, what? How does that true? Well, when the police come, when they have a warrant, right? They don't have a look warrant, they have a search warrant.
Right.
As a historian, I'm going to use a Socratic method. I'm going to search for the truth of a thing, and I'm not going to give up. I'm going to look at all the variables. I'm going to tear things apart. I'm going to deconstruct it. I'm going to reconstruct it. I'm going to say, well, wait a minute. 2 and 2 is not equaling 4 here. It's equaling 6, and it must equal 4. So let me dig further. Let me get to the truth of a thing. History will do that for you. And then history is a discipline that's reading and writing. We deal with documents, we deal with documentation, we deal with what we find and put it together. So we have lots of other disciplines that we work with and we couldn't do without, like archaeology, linguistics, the humanities, literature. There's so many anthropology, cultural anthropology. There's so many disciplines, sociology, that just interact with us. Psychology, I'm just hitting the biology, as you can see. But history is very important for those reasons. So, yeah.
Dr. Hogsett, it's always fascinating to talk with you. We could talk with you the whole half hour. Thank you for being here on the show this afternoon.
Thank you, Todd. It's always great. I love to talk history. Anytime you want to talk history, I'm your guy.
He's the man.
Come to my class if you like. All right.
Thanks, Dr. Hogsett. We're going to take a short break from the topic. When we return, we'll hear about the history of fashion. The show returns in 60 seconds.
Sometimes what you need just shows up. Houston Community College has your back, whether you're knocking out some basics or upping your game for a better job. Enroll today for spring classes and frame your future with HCC.
For more than a year, we have kept you informed with more than 500 remote episodes. But now we're back, bigger and better, with more news and more guests. Join us live every weekday at 10 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube, and on HCC TV at noon and 5 p.m. You can watch from anywhere. We go where you go.
Welcome back to The Topic. I'm Todd Duplantis. You're watching us live on Facebook and YouTube. You can also catch our rebroadcast of the show on HCC TV. This afternoon, we're talking about history across all disciplines here at HCC. And joining me now is Cheryl Whitaker, Fashion Merchandising Program Coordinator, and Bethany Herman, Public Services Librarian with our Fashion Archive. Thanks for being here, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
We're going to talk about, I want to start off with the Fashion Archive because we've talked about this on our shows. Maybe you can real quickly give us an idea of when this started, the idea of the amount of work that was put in it and how it's available for the public.
All right. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So the Fashion Archive actually started with Kay King, one of the founding chairs of the fashion department, when she identified the need for fashion students to understand the history of fashion design and to also start collecting items that they could actually use as teaching objects. Now, recently, in the most recent, last 5 years, we've collaborated from HCC libraries with the fashion department to help digitize a small sample of over 6,000 items that we have in the Fashion Archive. We've been able to digitize them to offer it as an open resource for anybody to see not only just a little bit brief kind of glimpse into fashion history, but also into HCC history as well.
And Cheryl, you're to teach the students, I imagine, looking at this archive, because you can look at it digitally, and taking these items out piece by piece and showing us to the students, that can preserve the longevity of these items, because some of them are very, very old. I understand we've got bridesmaid dresses from, go back in Texas history. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, our oldest piece in the archive is from 1728. It's a shoe. But for when we think about students, it gives them an opportunity to see up close the fine details, because fashion and apparel are all about details. So them being able to see how this was done, oftentimes it was done by hand, really sort of supports all of the lectures and the information regarding fashion history.
And Bethany, let me ask you, when you're talking the fashion merchandising department, a bit eclectic group of folks in that department. You guys are librarians. How do you mesh the two? Y'all got to talk different languages, I guess, in the beginning.
Well, probably at the beginning, but for me as a librarian, my background is actually in history as well, so in the humanities. So I kind of understood when I saw some of the items that I'm like, I want to preserve everything, but we can't. We have very limited time and resources. So we had to kind of have those ongoing conversations about, well, what's the most important items that we want to highlight on the digital representation of the archive. And so things like the shoe, the oldest item that we could have. Yes, let's digitize, even though it's a single shoe and not a pair, let's digitize that. Let's also digitize, for instance, the bridesmaid's dress from the White House wedding of Lucy Baines Johnson, our own LBJ's daughter. Yeah. The reason that we found this out is that we have documentation from that day, and also we can compare it with the inscription that's written into the wedding dress, or the bridesmaid's dress. So it's really just having those kind of ongoing conversations that have helped us to kind of build a very cross-departmental collaboration.
And let me ask you this, Cheryl, before this archive was available digitally, what was the process when a class wanted to get a hold of one of these items or use it? How did that work?
Well, generally, it depends on the faculty member. You would, because when you're pulling something from the archives, of course, you want to relate it to your coursework. And so it's a matter of being very careful in handling these items because they are so delicate. And really, it becomes a lesson in curation for our students, how to handle these special garments. And it's easier to relay the text, right, when you can actually see the garment and you can speak to the history of it. And it gives students a much better understanding. So really, it becomes your faculty member pulling items specifically for what their needs are.
And the ease of it now?
Extremely easy. It's the same thing. I mean, now we have the website, which is great, but there's nothing like seeing these garments in person to really get an understanding of the history of it.
Bethany, for how many items are in this archive currently, and how long on average how many hours does it take to archive one item? What is the process?
So in the digital archive right now, we have about just over 500 items digitized. And the process from selection to the photography process, to making sure that the metadata, that the information is well researched and correct, and uploading it into our thing, it's kind of works its way out in phases over either the course of a year, or sometimes like we're on our third phase right now. So we're adding more to the archive, which is going to be very exciting. But it takes anywhere from less than 6 months to a year from start to finish.
Wow. That's a lot of hours. Cheryl, this archive is available even if you're not a student. Can the general public browse through it online?
You can. The website is up 24/7. They have the opportunity to browse through. They can also reach out to us and ask if they have questions regarding these things. And I'm sure Professor Chapman will probably shoot me for this, but if the public really wants to have some sort of meeting where they can come up and look at it, they can reach out to our faculty and we can probably set something up for them.
So where they could see Lucy Baines' dress in person?
Absolutely.
Let me ask you. Go ahead. What's that, Bethany?
We're on social media as well. So the Fashion Archive is HCC Fashion Archive. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, even just kind of see some of the behind the scenes of how we put this archive together. You can also see some really gorgeous shots of the items that we have.
We've got about 1 minute left. Go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just going to say, we actually have anywhere from 8,000 to 9,000 pieces.
Wow.
Just in our archive on our campus.
Cheryl, I've got about 45 seconds left. What's your favorite item from the archive personally?
Oh, wow. That's a hard one. There's a Charles James dress. It's almost in shreds, but it is from the early 1900s, and it's an incredible piece of work. It's just beautiful.
And Bethany, I'll ask you that same question. I got a few seconds left. What's your favorite piece?
Oh my goodness. Well, like the Lucy Baines Johnson just has like such a historical connection for me, but we also have a House of Worth gold dress from like the 1920s, 1930s that really kind of, I think captures the essence of that period of time of liberation and freedom of expression. So it's going to be a tie. I can't pick one.
Yeah, there's so many good details in the fashion. It's hard to select one item.
We want to thank you both for being here and giving us a little information on our fashion archive and history it involves. If you'd like to visit the archive, we'll have a link in our social media posts. Thank y'all for being here. Coming up next, we're going to talk about art history and why it's studied for more than just art's sake. Topic returns in 60 seconds.
Sometimes what you need just shows up. Houston Community College has your back, whether you're knocking out some basics or upping your game for a better job. Enroll today for spring classes and frame your future with HCC.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
Things could be stranger, but I don't know how. I'm going through changes, through all of the strangeness. I'm going through changes now.
Welcome back to The Topic. I'm Todd Duplantis. We are live on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks to all of us who joined us this afternoon. We're live at 1 p.m. every Tuesday afternoon when HCC is in session. You can also catch our rebroadcast on HCC TV. Today, we're talking about how the study of history spans across all of our programs here at HCC. We're joined now by Catherine Rhodes Fields. She's the Division Chair of Studio Art and Art History in the Visual Arts program. Catherine, thanks for being here this afternoon.
Thank you, Todd, for having me.
Tell us first off about art history. I've got to confess, and I'll give you a caveat on this point. When I went to college, we used to all joke around, oh, we're going to take an easy course. We're going to go take art history. That's the hardest course you could take at U of H. Boy, I'm telling you, it really was a tough course. And you learn kind of the hard way, but it was so fulfilling. Tell us about art history as a historical discipline in academia, besides just more filling out, being well-rounded with all your courses.
Right, absolutely. So it is a discipline that actually goes to a PhD. You can earn a PhD in it. And what the courses try to do is we try to contextualize and allow students to analyze and interpret works of art throughout history and kind of look at them from a perspective, right, in terms of social communication and its significance and why it impacts us today, still to this day. And so, of course, we look at different types of art, from painting and drawings, which we're familiar with the most, to prints, also to fashion, as well as film and video and digital art, not also including architecture. So it really covers a lot of the human experience and how art and artists and artisans have impacted that across the centuries. So that's really, in a nutshell, what art history tries to cover.
Why is there a big debate over art versus artifact?
Well, and that's a very fun conversation to have in an art history class, because there is a perception about craft, and that is the bigger question between art and artifact. So fine art is believed to be something that is made out of an emotional response, not a response for a need, such as a vase or a cooking implement, right, which we would consider, or an arrowhead, or even a Viking ship, or a belt buckle, like what we found at Sutton Hoo in England. And so the idea is that, but when you look at the inlay and the carving, you think an artisan absolutely made it. So there becomes this kind of blurred line between the nature of the object and its performance, and how it's interpreted. And so that becomes a wonderful conversation for students to have, as well as art historians to have, to kind of break that up and get people to think about how art and the role that it plays in our world. And so, it's always a fun conversation to have. Is there a definitive answer? Some would say yes. right? And some would say no, because the lines are blurring, especially now with 4D technology and virtual reality. Yeah. There's lots of differences. It's an ongoing question. And I think that's what makes it such an exciting discipline to study.
Well, let's talk about the impact of art history over other fields of studies like archaeology, chemistry, chemistry. How does it play into that?
Well, going back to what my former colleague said, archiving, right? So their paints, you actually can date paintings by looking at the chemistry of the paint. So prior to the Impressionist era, most artists, such as Vermeer, actually mixed their own paints. And so you can tell that the paints have been mixed in the chemistry of them. You can also tell when a paint was made because of the radioactive materials that are in the paint. Yeah. So if a painting was made after 1945, the paint will actually have radioactive materials in it. So there is that kind of understanding of chemistry. Also the tensile strength of paper and the burn rate of paper and what the paper is made of. Is it cotton? Is it wood-based? So on and so forth. So chemistry and art history and archiving all plays together. And it really informs, as well as politics. If you think about the art of Goya, he was an advocate of holding accountable the politics, especially the Spanish Inquisition and his Los Caprichos theories. So, I think that there's just so much that kind of encompasses our world and looking at it and see how artists have responded in many different ways, whether it's decorative art, or politically based art, such as cartoons, so on and so forth. So it's a very rich way of looking and seeing history. And I studied history as a minor and undergraduate. And so I always looked at art as a reference for everything that happened around it. And I know that is something in our curriculum at HCC, we offer those opportunities for our students to do with our rigorous curriculum that we have in that capacity.
Well, one thing I always found fascinating, you kind of touched on this, is where art can also tell people when world cataclysmic events happen, where they can look back and paint and trace like great floods that happen or volcanic activity. That's always fascinated me as well. And I guess that ties into the whole chemistry angle that you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Art is the best documentation of our culture that we have. And it's important for us to preserve it, but it's also very important for us to understand it, to contextualize it, to synthesize it, to analyze it, and look at it and respond to it. And think about the role that we play in that accountability of who we are as humans in this world, in this great, big global world that we live in.
As for students who are looking to get into art history as a career, where could they wind up working if they didn't teach at a college or go into education?
Right. Well, museums are definitely the best way to go about it. But also, too, having a little bit of studio art background doesn't hurt as well. Archaeology exploration teams do look for art historians and want art historians that have the ability to access and utilize technology, especially at dig sites. Because art historians can contextualize the artifacts and put that within that perspective. So go to dig sites, travel the world, work for museums and galleries, but also to be published authors and give feedback. I know that this is going to be a little silly, but I know that Dan Brown's book, the Da Vinci Code, really spoke to the power of art history and the power of history and the power of artifact and fine art and how it creates, you can even be a published author that creates works of fiction that ties it in there. So that's an exciting opportunity as well.
Catherine, we appreciate you being here on the show and bringing us up to speed a little bit with art history. If you're interested in our programs, we'll have some links in our social media post after the show. Thanks for joining us on the topic. I'm Todd Duplantis. We'll see you again next Tuesday.